The last time Ava looked back at us, me, Noah, and Bella, she promised it was only for a few weeks. She kissed the children quickly, her hand lingering on the doorframe as though she wasn't sure whether to walk out or stay, and then she was gone. Weeks became months, months stretched into years, and eventually 5 full years had passed without a phone call, without a birthday card, without even a single note to explain why. Then, one morning, tucked between bills and grocery flyers, there was an envelope with her handwriting across the front. Inside, a wedding invitation. Ava was getting married again, and she wanted me there. She wanted me to give my blessing. I stared at that card so long that the coffee beside me went cold, my thumb pressing over her name as though the paper itself might bruise. I didn't drive 2 hours to start a fight. I came carrying an envelope of my own, 3 pages and 1 voicemail, that might protect a man I had never met, and perhaps spare him from the kind of silence that had nearly broken me and my children. The moment I stepped into the ballroom, the music faltered, the bride's smile trembled, and all eyes turned as I held out what I'd brought. What she read next was enough to stop the wedding. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. What would you have done if you were in my place, standing in that hall with a truth heavy enough to silence a room? My name is Marcus, I'm 46, and I never planned on raising 2 children on my own. But when Ava walked out the door 5 years ago, promising she'd be back in just a few weeks, that's exactly what happened. She left behind Noah, who was only 7 at the time, and Bella, barely 4. Today they're 12 and 9, and they've learned how to live with questions that have no good answers. I've done my best to be steady, pragmatic, the kind of parent who shows up even when it's hard. But nothing prepared me for the envelope that arrived in our mailbox with her handwriting on it. Inside, an invitation to her wedding. She wanted me there, front and center, as if the past 5 years could be folded neatly away like the paper it was written on. I wasn't just being asked to attend, I was being asked to validate a new life built on the ashes of the old one. Ava, in her early 40s now, was once the woman I thought I would grow old with. She told me it was temporary when she left, that she just needed time to clear her head. Instead, she vanished from daily life completely. No bedtime calls for the kids, no school visits, no birthday cakes with her handwriting scrawled across the frosting. Just silence. Then there was Ethan Cole, the groom. His reputation in town was polished, the kind of man who always wore the right suit, smiled at the right time, and shook hands with just the right people. He wasn't a stranger to appearances, and his world looked like everything ours had stopped being. I couldn't help but wonder if he knew the truth, that the woman standing beside him was still legally tied to me because our divorce paperwork had stalled years back, unfinished and forgotten. It wasn't bigamy, it wasn't scandal on purpose, it was neglect. But in that neglect lived danger, and in that danger lived the chance to repeat the same mistakes all over again. The stakes weren't just mine, they belonged to Noah and Bella. If I turned this into a spectacle, if I stood up in a ballroom full of strangers and shouted everything I carried, they'd bear the weight of whispers and gossip for years to come. But if I stayed silent, if I sat in the back and let the music play, then another man might find himself standing in my shoes one day, wondering how he never saw it coming. And somewhere in the middle of all that was Ava herself, their mother. Protecting her reputation felt strange after the years of absence, but protecting my children from a storm they didn't create mattered more. My dilemma was simple in words, but heavy in reality. Tell the truth and risk everything, or let the lie continue and risk even more. What Ava didn't know was that I had kept something she left behind. One night early on, my phone buzzed at 2:11 a.m., and I answered to her voice, weary, cracked, unsure. She spoke words she might not even remember now, but I did. I kept that voicemail like a sealed jar, a reminder of the real reason she left and the real fragility of the choices she made. She might have wanted me to show up quietly, to nod politely, and to walk away as if those years of silence had never happened. But that wasn't why she invited me. She didn't invite me to forgive her. She invited me to witness her new life, to stand silently as a piece of the past. And what she never expected was that I would bring proof. What do you think I should have done? Would you have carried that envelope into the hall, or left it behind? The invitation arrived on a Thursday, folded neatly inside an envelope that carried the faint smell of a perfume I once knew by heart. Cream cardstock, embossed hotel logo, Ava's handwriting across the front in letters too careful to be casual. My thumb traced the name she now used, a hyphenated version of her maiden name stitched onto coal, like she was trying to build a bridge from who she used to be to who she wanted to become. Inside, tucked between the printed lines, was her handwriting again. Your blessing means everything. I read it 3 times, the words staring back at me as if they were a request, maybe even a command. A blessing for what? A rewrite? I turned the card over, hoping for more, but found less instead. On the RSVP portal, there was a space for an emergency contact. She had typed in 3 words, no one listed, no family, no children, no one. It was as though the last 15 years of her life had been erased with the click of a backspace key. And I found myself asking a question I couldn't shake. If you erase a past, do you also erase the people inside it? Curiosity led me deeper, the way it always does when something feels off. I logged into the county's online court portal, the same one I'd avoided for years because the sight of unfinished paperwork felt heavier than I could bear. There it was, a docket with our names still bound together, stalled in limbo with the words, "Action required," stamped in red. Action neither of us ever took. Ava wasn't divorced, not fully, not legally. Our marriage was a house half torn down, left standing awkwardly against the weather. I dug through drawers for old files, and with them came a stack of pediatric bills, each one marked, "Paid by M. Carter." My name, my responsibility, and then the bank email I remembered too well, application incomplete, co-borrower not found. I had filled out that form hoping to refinance the house, hoping for a fresh start. She had already walked away. What she might not have known is that 6 months after she left, a storage invoice appeared in her new name, paid for by Ethan Cole, a neat transaction tucked quietly into her new life. And I asked myself again, why box up the past if you're certain you won't need it again? But nothing echoed louder than what I had saved on my phone, a voicemail left at 2:11 a.m. in the early days of her absence. Her voice cracked through the speaker, worn thin by exhaustion, trembling like she was speaking in the dark to herself, more than to me. "I can't hold everything up, Marcus. He says I'm better off starting clean. Tell the kids I'll call when I'm steady." I replayed it so many times I could recite it word for word. The pause before she said starting clean, the way she whispered steady, like it was a place she believed existed. There was no malice in her tone, only fear, only fatigue, only the kind of panic that swells when you feel cornered by life itself. Postpartum exhaustion, debts piling higher than the fridge, a new mentor who had whispered promises of stability. Ethan. And there it was, the truth I couldn't ignore. Starting over isn't a crime. Pretending the past belongs to someone else is. And so I carried that voicemail with me, not as a weapon, but as a reminder of what silence costs. If you're still with me, comment "I'm still here" and tell me your city. I'm curious who's watching in real time. I thought I knew the edges of this story, but then one conversation pulled me further in. A mutual acquaintance, someone who had drifted between both circles, told me something I hadn't expected. Months after Ava left, the best man, Ethan's closest friend, had come to me asking for a loan, not for himself, but on Ava's behalf. He said she was caught between bills, trying to bridge the gap until her new situation stabilized. Out of habit, or maybe out of old loyalty, I gave what I could. That loan was never paid back. It wasn't the money that stung, it was what it revealed. Ava's new circle wasn't built on solid ground. It was leaning on the same support she had abandoned, using my credibility to hold up their image. I had become a safety net they pretended didn't exist. Who needs a blessing when what they need is a backbone? That question rang in my head long after the conversation ended. I began to look more closely at Ethan, the man who now stood at the center of her new life. On the surface, his record gleamed. Newspaper clippings spoke of charity fundraisers, tech conferences, and generous donations. His picture always featured that same calculated smile, the kind that reassures investors and neighbors alike. But beneath the polish, there were filings buried in court databases. One mediation summary caught my eye, sealed and careful in its wording. No accusations spelled out, no public drama, just 2 words stamped over the record: agreed boundaries. It was enough to make me pause. I wasn't looking at proof of violence or scandal. What I saw instead was a pattern, the kind of control that hides in small details, in isolation through money, in non-disclosure agreements whispered into contracts. He wasn't a monster, but he wasn't transparent either. And Ava wasn't standing at an altar of love. She was standing at an altar of image. That was the moment I knew I needed to prepare, not for a fight, not for spectacle, but for clarity. I assembled 3 pages that would speak louder than any outburst. The first was a simple ledger, child support and medical bills paid, documented, proof that I had never failed Noah and Bella, no matter how hard it got. The second was the court docket, showing our marital status was unresolved, not to humiliate Ava, but to prevent her from stepping into legal trouble she didn't fully understand. And the third was her own voice, the transcript of that 2:11 a.m. voicemail. Not to weaponize it in front of a crowd, but to hand back to her quietly, a reminder of where this all began. I looked at those pages stacked neatly in an envelope and told myself one truth. If I speak, it's to her. If I stop the music, it's only so she can hear it. What would you have done with that envelope in your hands? Hold it back to keep the peace, or carry it into the room knowing it could change everything? When I pulled into the hotel parking lot, my hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they should have. The glass entrance gleamed, polished so clean it reflected the morning sky, but I could feel my pulse quicken. I stepped out, envelope tucked inside my jacket, and walked toward the lobby. My palms were damp, my throat dry, but my voice had to be steady. At the check-in desk, I asked for the wedding planner, and when she appeared, smiling the way professionals do when they think everything is under control, I spoke calmly. "I'm not here to object," I told her. "I only need 2 minutes with the bride." She studied me for a long moment, weighing whether I was trouble or truth, and I waited, letting silence carry my intent. 2 minutes. That was all I asked for. What takes 2 minutes and rewrites 5 years? She led me down a corridor lined with fresh flowers and into a small side room, the kind used for storage or breaks between ceremonies. The air smelled faintly of roses and candle wax. When Ava walked in, her gown brushed the floor, the sound soft but unmistakable. She froze when she saw me, her eyes widening as though she hadn't believed I would actually come. I reached into my jacket and placed the envelope on the table between us. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. Instead, I spoke the words I had rehearsed in my head for weeks. I told her I remembered the fear in her voice the night she called at 2:11 a.m., how she had been convinced that starting clean was the only way forward. I told her I'd learned enough about Ethan to know that not all glitter was gold, that his life was polished but fragile. And then I told her about Noah's first home run, about Bella's drawing that had won her a ribbon, about the milestones she had missed but could still choose to be part of. My voice didn't carry anger, it carried truth. Ava sat down slowly and opened the envelope. She read the court docket first, her hands trembling at the reminder that we were still bound by law, not just by memory. Then she turned to the ledger, page after page of proof that I had carried the weight she left behind, not out of resentment, but out of necessity for our children. Finally, her eyes landed on the transcript. Her own words, written out plainly. "I can't hold everything up, Marcus. He says I'm better off starting clean. Tell the kids I'll call when I'm steady." She pressed a hand to her mouth and whispered, barely audible, "I told myself you'd moved on, that I wasn't needed." I leaned forward and answered softly, "You're needed, as their mother, and you're owed honesty before you promise forever." She looked at me for a long moment, her breath unsteady, and then she nodded. Her voice was clear, though fragile. "I need to pause this." The planner, standing quietly in the corner, gave a subtle nod and slipped away. Moments later, I heard it. The strings that had been playing so confidently out in the hall came to an abrupt stop. The music that had been meant to carry her into a new beginning fell silent, and in that silence, the truth finally had its place. When Ava stepped back into the ballroom, the weight of the moment followed her. Guests straightened in their seats, expecting music, vows, a celebration. Instead, she raised her hand gently and said there would be a delay. No spectacle, no accusations, just a pause. Murmurs rippled through the room, and Ethan tried to catch the moment with optics, leaning toward her, whispering, "We can talk after." But Ava shook her head, her voice calm enough for those nearest to hear. "We will, just not at an altar." The string quartet set their bows down. Silence carried more weight than any announcement could have. I didn't linger. I left quietly, walking past tables draped in white and roses arranged in perfect spirals. At the door, I handed the planner a sealed card meant for Ava. Inside were photos. Noah on the pitcher's mound, striking out a batter, Bella holding up her latest painting with the words, "For Mommy," scribbled across the bottom. My voice carried only for me as I stepped into the hallway. Stopping the music isn't the same as breaking the song. Sometimes you pause just long enough to really hear the words. In the weeks that followed, phone calls were returned, lawyers finally did their part, and boundaries found their place. The kids learned something that's hard to explain but simple to live by. Endings don't always need an audience. They can happen quietly, in small rooms, with choices made that ripple far beyond applause. Did I do the right thing by keeping it private? If you were Ava, or if you were me, what would you have done in that side room? If this story resonated, a like helps it reach someone who might need it. And subscribe if you want more true, human stories every week.